All right, we are back with another episode of the Vendetta Sports Daily Show. I'm with Andrew McGinnis. How you doing today, Andrew?
Doing all right. How are you, Griffin?
I'm doing good. So the first thing that we want to start off with, NHL playoffs are coming right around the corner, and there has been only one locked up matchup so far, and that is the Maple Leafs versus the Lightning. So what are your first impressions on that?
I mean, I think this is probably going to wind up being the most intriguing series of last year's or of this year's playoffs. Obviously, these two teams met in the first round of last year. We're probably going to get an Oilers Kings rematch as well, which should also be a great series out in the West. But you know, for how much has changed over the last year, the Lightning are still the Lightning, and the Maple Leafs are still the Maple Leafs. Really, Tampa Bay still has this aura around them. Obviously, they've won the Eastern Conference now 3 straight years, the back-to-back cups in 20 and 21. They're still one of the top teams in the league, even though they're dealing with some injuries right now, and they've lost a couple guys from last year and from the cup wins as well. But I mean, they're still a threat to go all the way, of course, obviously, and so is Toronto as well. But I mean, no one's really going to fully be able to believe in the Maple Leafs until they can finally, get that monkey off their back and get by the first round. They played Tampa Bay so close last year. It was, for Maple Leafs fans, one of the, I'd say one of the toughest, but I mean, they've had some pretty bad defeats over these last few years, obviously. But I mean, they were right there with Tampa Bay. They were even with the team that wound up winning the Eastern Conference last year and won the Stanley Cup the 2 years prior. So you can maybe take some solace from that, but at the same time, Toronto's starting to run out of time with some of these, big guys, they're superstar players, Matthews and Nylander are free agents after next year, Marner and Tavares the year after that. So this is the moment really for the Maple Leafs where they've got to step up because, in prior years, obviously there was an urgency to win, but you have time with some of those your best players. Now that time is really starting to potentially run out. Obviously, they could re-sign those guys in free agency, of course, or before they even get there. But this is as big as it gets for Toronto, and obviously their GM Kyle Dubas his contract is up at the end of the year, so he's built a great team. He's acquired some great players, made some good moves, made some bad moves too, but it really feels like this series is going to define his legacy in Toronto.
Yeah, I really agree on all the points you made there. I think this series definitely is probably the best we will see out of the first round predicted matchups. Obviously, we kind of have a growing rivalry between the Leafs and especially the Lightning now, and the Leafs kind of haven't been able to really get out of the first or second round, and especially with the moves Dubas has made this kind of trade deadline, and he's kind of went all in because he knows that
Yeah,
Matthews and Marner are
absolutely.
just all they might leave. Who knows if they'll stay with the Leafs? And I've been kind of hearing some rumors that who knows if Matthews. I think it'd be really cool if he went to the Coyotes because he is from Arizona. So
Yeah, I'm sure he's dying. I mean, he obviously didn't get to play in the NCAA because he played overseas. So, I'm sure he's dying for that college experience. And
dying to play in Mullet Arena.
the Coyotes can provide it.
Yeah, they can.
It is truly one of a kind.
Yeah, but I think I gotta say I think it's such a tough matchup to kind of lean who will actually win this series, especially because they've been kind of splitting games all year, and I think it just comes down to better goaltending. And I feel like Vasilevsky in the playoffs really is a different mode than Samsonov, and I think that the Lightning might edge him out, but who knows? Leafs fans travel well, and they've both been very good. So, right now, any other matchups you see that are interesting for if playoffs started right now?
I don't know if we're necessarily going to get this one because Carolina has been struggling a little bit since obviously they lost Andrei Svechnikov and, of course, Max Pacioretty already. But as of now, we're in for a Devils-Rangers first-round series. And I think people kind of forget how great that rivalry used to be and still can be because it's been a long time since these two teams have been good at the same time. They haven't made the playoffs in the same year since 2012. And that year, of course, they played in the Eastern Conference Final. Incredibly memorable series. Of course, the Adam Henrique goal at the end to win it, one of the most famous play-by-play calls in NHL history by Mike Emmerich on that series winner in overtime. Those are two teams. The Devils of this year are kind of in a similar stage where the Rangers were last season. The young players, starting to get some experience and obviously starting to develop. Obviously, Jack Hughes and Nico Hischier, one of the best 1-2 punches in center down the game. Hieschier's been in the playoffs before. Hughes has not been. And of course, Luke Hughes, might join as well, obviously with Michigan being eliminated from the NCAA tournament. So he could step in and try to write the same story that Cale Makar did in 2019 with Colorado when he came in from college, jumped into the lineup in the middle of the playoffs, scored in his NHL debut in Game 3 in the first round against Calgary, and rode Colorado to a deep playoff run that year. And obviously, we know what the Avalanche have done since with the consistency that they've had. But the Rangers are a team that kind of looks sluggish at times in the first half of the season, but they've really picked it up. Obviously, probably the busiest deadline of anyone, or at the very least, the most impactful deadline of anyone, bringing in Tarasenko and Patrick Kane. I know Kane was out last night with an injury, but I expect he's going to be back for the Stanley Cup playoffs, obviously. Tons of skill and firepower in that Rangers lineup. And talk about great goaltending. Obviously, Igor Shesterkin, Vezina winner last year, one of the best goaltenders in the NHL. He, too, has been playing well in the second half and helped the Rangers kind of make that jump from good in the first half to really great in the second half. And we kind of saw them take a similar leap last year as well. They were a much better team at 5-on-5 last season after they reinforced things at the trade deadline, brought in some guys to help shore up their roster, and obviously, of course, made to the Eastern Conference Finals. So I think that's going to be a really exciting series. I think we'll see some of both teams' fans in each other's buildings, obviously, of course, with the close proximity. It's not too long a trip for either fan base, to be sure. So
Yep.
I think if we get that series, which might not happen necessarily, I think technically the Rangers could still win the Metro, but it's almost certainly going to be New Jersey or Carolina. Carolina's got the slight edge right now. So if we get that series, whether it's round 1 or round 2, I think it's going to be great.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. As a Devils fan, I think it's great for us to be back in the playoffs. I love what Hughes is doing. Heischer, the addition of Timo Meyer, and just a lot of guys have been stepping up. Dawson Mercer and just Jesper Bratt have been very good. Vitek Vanacek has been very good in goal. And even though we've had some kind of concerns with Mackenzie Blackwood in the past, he's had a few good games, but I would like Akira Schmid to be in the playoffs with us. He's kind of proven to be a brick wall at times, and he's stepped up a lot as a young goaltender. Both of them young, but he's been good. So I would love to see that matchup. Hughes is 1 point away from tying the franchise record for points in a season. So he'll most likely break that at the end of the year. I hope he does. Unfortunately, he's not going to get the 50 goals because he's at 42 now, I think. And
darn, what a scrub.
Yeah. But other than that, I think the Devils could overtake Carolina. It's obviously going to be kind of hard. They kind of have a game in hand right now, I believe, and are ahead of the Devils by 2 points. So, whoever gets at first in the Metro, I think will obviously kind of sneak away with a first-round win just because you're probably going to play the Panthers or the Islanders. Whoever knows. The Penguins are probably going to be out of it. But I think Carolina moves on, and I think Jersey moves on over the Rangers, even though the Rangers have kind of been stacked on the deadline, and they do have better goaltending, but the Devils just had their number ever since the season started. So I think we could definitely get a Carolina versus New Jersey second-round playoff matchup. And then moving on to the top of the bracket in the Eastern Conference, who do you think the Islanders are going to stay as the wildcard team?
I think they are going to stay, and I think if the Islanders get into the playoffs, they're a team. We've talked about great goaltending. That's kind of been the theme so far on this show. Well, Ilya Sorokin is having a fantastic year. If not for what Linus Ullmark's doing in Boston, he might be a front runner for the Vezina potentially. He's been fantastic, and he's been great the last couple of seasons. Islanders just obviously had Semyon Varlamov before him, so they had kind of an established starter. And last season they had that nightmare road trip, and they were really in the playoff race for most of the season. But they're in the playoff race right now, and the way the Islanders play with their physicality, they kind of remind me of the 2020-21 Canadiens, where there was that whole idea of a team that's built for the Stanley Cup playoffs with the physicality that they have and some of the depth. Obviously, they got Bo Horvat, so they've got they're stacked down the middle. If they want to go Barzal, Horvat, and Brock Nelson, that is dynamite 1, 2, 3 down the middle. If all those guys are healthy, obviously, and playing the way that they can at their peak. Obviously, Horvat having a career year. They got. The Islanders got him. They were not a lot to make the playoffs, and they obviously still very are not. But it'd be really satisfying, I would imagine, for Lamoriello, to make that big move. Usually don't see a team on the bubble like that. The Islanders making that big of a move for, at the time, a rental. Obviously, they've extended Horvat since then, but it would be, I'm sure, nice for Lamoriello to see that leap of faith rewarded, certainly. And The Islanders, obviously, they've got some experienced guys. They pushed Tampa pretty hard in those two Eastern Conference Finals when they met in 2020 and 2021. So they're a team that knows what it takes. Obviously, in fact, of course, in that road to the Eastern Conference Final in 2021, they did upset the Boston Bruins in the second round in those playoffs. So, and a lot of guys from both sides are going to be in that series potentially as well if those two teams meet up. Obviously, Islanders, one, have to make the playoffs. They could also, potentially get the first wild card and play the Metropolitan Division winner as well. So I think the Islanders are going to make it, and I think if they do, they are a team that will not be a pushover in round one.
Yeah, I agree. I think the Islanders do. I have to agree with you. I think that the Islanders do make it to the playoffs, even though they've kind of been off and on recently. The Penguins are only 1 point behind them with the same games remaining as Panthers, Islanders, and Pittsburgh. They all have the same 79, but there's only a 1 point difference. I think the Panthers could fall out potentially just because I feel like their goaltending has been such an issue, and Spencer Knight has been injured this year, and he's been kind of inconsistent, and Bobrovsky is kind of fallen off a cliff, and some of his games have been truly detrimental to the Panthers when they need it the most. But I think Pittsburgh, they've been like the grittiest team out of the Islanders, Panthers, and themselves, obviously. But they kind of choked. They were kind of locking up that wild card spot for a while now. But they've kind of fallen out of it. But I could definitely see Pittsburgh coming back in to replace the Panthers.
Yeah, and Florida's in the most precarious position as well. I mean, you look at the schedules for these three teams, their final three games. Pittsburgh is at Detroit versus Chicago at Columbus.
Yeah.
They should win all three of those games.
Yep.
The Islanders are home against the Flyers. They're at Washington. They're home against Montreal. They should win all three of those games. Florida's at Washington, home against Toronto, and home against Carolina.
Yep.
The one saving grace potentially for Florida is that maybe those teams are resting guys if they've already got their seating locked up at that point, but obviously that's not a guarantee. And even Toronto or Carolina with 4 or 5 of their best players scratch, you could argue they're just as good as Columbus probably. In fact, they probably are just as good, if not better, than a fully healthy Columbus team, or not fully healthy, obviously, because they've lost guys like Werenski, of course. But what you're going to see from the Blue Jackets with their current roster, even if Toronto or Carolina is scratching their best players, and they're still going to be a better team, certainly. So it's going to be tough for Florida. And I feel like for Florida, if they get in, I feel like if they played Boston, they'd have more or less no shot. If they got Carolina or New Jersey, I could see them pushing, because Florida's obviously a very offensive heavy team. They'd like to go run and gun, and I think that could play against Carolina. I think it played more so in New Jersey, obviously. I mean, Carolina, the thing with, obviously, I talked about with Hurricanes is they don't have Andrei Svechnikov or Max Pacioretty right now, so they've found a way to make it work, obviously, of course, but it's going to be hard for them potentially in the playoffs as they go deeper and deeper, potentially to keep finding consistent goal scoring with those two guys out of the lineup. I think it could play better against New Jersey just because obviously the Devils' defense is, their goaltending, I'd say, is probably their weakest part of the team, even though you said they've got some guys like Vanecek have stepped up, but obviously Vitek Vanecek not as proven as some of the other goaltenders we've talked about. And obviously we talked about for Florida, Spencer Knight is in the NHL player assistance program. Bobrovsky's had an up and down year. Shout out former Flyer Alex Lyon. He is trying his best to just scratch and claw and push the Panthers into the playoffs. And it might happen potentially, but you trust a guy who's been a third string goalie for most of his career to get the job done against one of the NHL's top teams. Probably not. As someone who loves Alex Lyon, he's got AHL playoff experience. He once stopped 94 of 95 shots in a 5 overtime win for the Lehigh Valley Phantoms, but obviously the NHL playoffs, whole different beast.
Yeah, I agree. Speaking of that, I want to bring this up. The Bruins got their 61st win only just a few nights ago, and they play the Devils tomorrow. They play the Flyers, Washington, and Montreal as their final 4 games. Do you think they will break the record?
Yeah, I think they've got. I think that win against Toronto coming from behind basically sealed it, because even if you lose to New Jersey, which they could still beat the Devils, but obviously it's 2 heavyweights. You only have to win 2 of 3 against 3 below 500 non-playoff teams in Philadelphia, Washington, and what was the last one? Montreal. Yeah.
Yep.
So I think they are going to set the all-time record for single season wins, which is bonkers to think about, given all the uncertainty around the Bruins at the start of the season. I had guys who were injured when last year's playoffs ended. Guys like Marchand and McAvoy, they were supposed to miss months. They were supposed to miss a significant part of the season. And they wound up coming back a lot sooner than expected. But even when those guys were out early in the year, they have been a wagon from start to finish, really. Obviously, they bring David Krejci back. They get Bergeron on a cheap contract to get a hometown discount. And I mean, I like the moves they made at the deadline as well with Orlov and Bertuzzi, stacking things further for them. Obviously, Linus Ullmark, there were some questions around him going into this year and what his fit was going to be on this team. But Jeremy Swayman's his stock was on the rise coming into the year, and it still is. But Ullmark has just been absolutely sensational with how he's played and the adjustments he's made this season. So, I mean, the Bruins are an outstanding team. We obviously saw a few years back with Tampa Bay that regular season success does not guarantee playoff success, of course. When the last time an NHL team won 60-plus games. But I mean, they are fantastic, and they are going to be certainly the favorite to win the Stanley Cup by a pretty significant margin.
Yeah, I agree. And I do have to agree, obviously. I feel like it's pretty clear-cut that the Bruins will win or will break the record of the NHL win record, which is 63, I believe. 62, yeah.
95 Red Wings and that 18-19 Lightning team.
Yep. I mean, looking back at it, I remember that Lightning team. They were so good, and I feel like no one could have ever beaten them. I had them to win all of my NHL bracket, and I remember.
I think I did too. I think everyone did.
Everyone did.
That was the year where people literally, so many people were like, I went over 8 on first round predictions.
Yeah. I remember, I think the Lightning sent out kind of a sorry to their fans after they got swept, kind of like the Phoenix Suns did after Luka torched them only a year back. But I think the Bruins take the win against New Jersey, sadly. But, I mean, they've just been so dominant all this year, and I think they get it Capitals, Flyers, and Canadiens. So they could end up with 65 wins in the season and legitimately momentum.
Yes, it's nuts to think about.
Moving on to the Western Conference right now, the Kraken just clinched their first playoff berth in their history of their franchise, and right now they would play the Avalanche. So what do you think of that matchup?
I think Seattle's a really great underdog story, obviously, with how bad they were last season. They made a couple additions in the offseason, but really nothing too major, obviously. I think they're a pretty cool story. I'm super pumped for their fan base to get to experience playoff hockey for the first time. It's such a cool thing. As a Flyer, even as a Flyers fan, I am happy for Dave Haxtell. It seems like he's made some adjustments, and I know he was not well liked in Philly, but he always seemed like a nice guy. So good for him for getting the most out of this Kraken roster and leading them to the Stanley Cup playoffs. That being said, if they play Colorado in the first round, it's going to be pretty tough. And obviously the big weakness with Seattle, and like this is what we talked about with every team, basically, it's their goaltending. Also a Flyers fan, so I've seen Martin Jones playing. Martin Jones, at this point in his career, he's an acceptable, NHL backup. He's not the guy who he was, 6 years ago or so when he was, the number one for San Jose, leading them to the Stanley Cup final in 2016. To have him as your starting goalie, or Philip Grubauer, who's, really struggled since coming to Seattle, whoever it is, and having those guys, hey, good luck. You're facing Nathan McKinnon and Mikko Rantanen in a 7-game series, among other great players on that Colorado team. It's a really tall ask. And we so often see that in the Stanley Cup playoffs, it's stars who lead the way. And obviously on star power, Seattle is completely overwhelmed in comparing top-end talent. Kraken certainly have depth. I certainly don't think that they're going to, just lay dead necessarily. But, I mean, against Colorado, I think that would be a pretty significant mismatch and probably a pretty short series.
Yeah, I think you worded that really well. I think just how potent the Colorado Avalanche offense has been just all season, and just with the goaltending, just miscues, and Colorado goaltending has been very good. And how do you score on that defense too? Especially if you're the Kraken, you might have all the depth.
How do you get the puck from that team?
Yeah, exactly. And you might not it might be a sweep, honestly. I like the Kraken. I like what they're doing, especially this year. But I think if you face Colorado in the first round, it's such a tough go. I'd much rather face the Stars, but I know they can't do that.
I mean, it might wind up working out that way.
Who knows? That Central Division race is getting quite tight too. So
they could maybe catch LA as well, or 4 points back with a game in hand. So it's not completely out of the realm of possibility. The problem with that is instead of trying to stop Nathan McKinnon and Mikko Rantanen, you have to try to stop Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl. So
Yeah.
it really doesn't get much easier.
No, it doesn't. I mean, whoever that playoff team is, you either get what you want, Edmonton or Avalanche. Pick your poison. So
Exactly. It's just
whoever
last
it
year's,
is,
top two Western Conference finalists. Nothing
yeah,
special.
exactly. But the Stars Wild matchup, I feel like that's one very interesting matchup. I think the Stars have they've been good in the playoffs, but I'm really interested to see the Wild and if Kaprizov comes back in time, which most likely he will. Matt
Yeah.
Boldy especially has been a dog. He's been on fire recently for the Wild, and Joel Eriksson too. So I think the Wild could have that. They don't have as good of goaltending as the Stars do, but they do have the depth in goaltending. And I would love to see Minnesota finally take home a series and play the Avalanche in the second round.
I would too. It is worth noting. So good news for the Wild is they are getting Kaprizov back tomorrow. They did lose Joel Eriksson last night to injury. He is listed week to week. Obviously, the playoffs start in about a week. So maybe a week and a half, probably closer. I think it's 17th, I want to say. So
something like that.
He might not be ready for the start of that series, which would really be a shame because I agree with you that I think a Dallas-Minnesota series could be tons of fun. Two very well-rounded teams, I feel like. They've obviously got some star power up front, Kaprizov, Robertson, Hintz, Eric Sexton's great. Boldy, obviously, his stock is on the rise. Miro Heiskanen and Jared Spurgeon on the back end, two defensemen, especially Spurgeon, who are, I think, pretty underrated. Could really have their coming out party in that potential series. And obviously, the Wild have made the playoffs every year since 2013, except for one season in 2019. They've only been to the second round twice. They've only won a game in the second round in one of those seasons. And so for them to have, back-to-back really stellar regular seasons, they could potentially have home ice in the first round again this year. They're 2 points back of Dallas and Colorado. Right now, they've played the same amount of games as Dallas, one more than Colorado. It would be really a real bummer for them, I'm sure, if they wind up with home ice back-to-back years in the first round and don't win a series. That's always been kind of the theme with Wild. They've been able to put together some good teams, but taking that next step has been so difficult for them. And obviously going through some adversity right now, of course, we'll see. It would definitely be an intriguing matchup for me for sure. But if Eriksson is hurt, Minnesota's center depth, it looks fairly spotty.
Yeah, I agree. I couldn't have said that better myself, but as a Minnesota boy, I grew up in Minnesota all my life. I mean, their sports team's given me so much pain, and the Wild always either beating the Blues in the first round and getting in the face of Blackhawks or the Avalanche or whoever it is. They would always get just spanked around, and it's just been sad to see, really. But I think if Eriksson comes back, and I think they can squeeze past the Stars, and who knows, they could beat Colorado. They've kind of had their number a little bit of the time against the Avalanche, but I think if as a Wild fan and a Devils fan, I think both these years are the years for them to actually do something in the playoffs finally. But moving along, Trey's team right now, the Golden Knights, they don't have Stone, as Trey always says, but when he comes back, they're going to be deadly. They'll play the Jets right now. Playoffs started. So what are your first impressions on that?
I mean, I like that matchup for Vegas. Winnipeg has, been a little bit better this season than years past. It's like a 5-on-5 team in their play there. Connor Hellebuyck's kind of been inconsistent this season, but obviously we know he has series stealing potential. The Jets have just kind of been really inconsistent this second half, and we always talk about teams. It's important for teams to be hot going into the Stanley Cup playoffs. And obviously the Jets. I mean, the thing with Winnipeg is if they're going to make the Stanley Cup playoffs, they're probably going to have to come in hot because they are being pushed to the limit right now by both Calgary and Nashville. I mean, it is a 3-team dogfight for that final wild card spot. So, maybe obviously some adrenaline rush kicking in there. There certainly is a lot of high-end talent on that Jets team. They've got some tremendous forward talent. I think Vegas is a team that is fairly well equipped to shut them down. I mean, Vegas has a pretty solid defense. William Karlsson, of course, we know he can be a shutdown center. Can play a really strong two-way game as well. Obviously, Mark Stone is, a two-way beast when he's at full strength. So I think if Stone is back, I think that Vegas probably wins that series fairly easily. If he's out, it could be a little bit closer, but Vegas definitely still has the upper hand, of course. And of course, the two teams met in the Western Conference Finals 5 years ago, and Vegas had the upper hand in that series as well too. So
Yep.
worth remembering.
Yeah, I think both teams, honestly, like you said before, have been kind of inconsistent this year. Like Winnipeg was first in the Central, I believe, at one point, and they just kind of tanked. I mean, I don't know what happened to them. They kind of lost their edge, and especially now, like they're down to what are they? Third in the uh, are they third in the Pacific?
Fourth in the Central.
Fourth and Central. Okay, that's what. Um, but they've just haven't been the greatest team and just inconsistent, as I said before. But I think Vegas would take that series kind of easily. I know they've had a little bit of goaltending concerns with Hill and the
Yeah,
new
that's
addition.
obviously always the big X factor,
Hmm.
of course, as we've talked about. It all comes back to goaltending.
It always does.
Obviously, Jonathan Quick could be in there as well, potentially. Got off that
Yeah.
really hot start when he was traded there. But yeah, I mean, since February 1st, Vegas second in the NHL in points percentage, Winnipeg 25th.
Hmm.
And the list of teams below them is not pretty.
I'm assuming it's Ducks, Coyotes, like
Yeah,
Blackhawks.
it is Canadians, Blue Jackets, Flyers, Chicago, San Jose, Washington, Anaheim in that order.
Washington.
From 26 to 32. Yeah, people forget that Washington was in the playoff race for a while, and then they kind of made the decision to sell, which surprised me, and obviously they've kind of just fallen off since.
Yeah, I remember Trey posting the Slack chat. It was a while back. I think it was in December or January, and Washington and Pittsburgh were both in the playoff spot. And he's like, "Who do you think is going to make the playoffs? Like, who will fall?" And I mean, clearly both teams have honestly fell. Like they've kind of just tanked in the rankings, especially like you just said, Washington, and even Pittsburgh is climbing back to a playoff spot. So
yeah, they're obviously on the outside looking in right now.
Mm-hmm. But moving on to our final series, we have you talked about a little bit earlier is Edmonton versus Kings, and I think just first impressions on that is it's kind of a trend, goaltending, and the Kings honestly have struggled a lot. Like Korpisalo has not been the greatest to say the least, and Edmonton just needs a goalie, man. Like Connor McDavid can't do it all. You can't score all the goals just to give up so many, and I mean whoever plays well in that series, obviously the Oilers have the upper edge with star power with Draisaitl, McDavid, and RNH. But I mean, I got to give it to the Oilers, but their goaltending is suspect.
Yeah, I'm actually going to push you a little bit on the goaltending narrative, at least for LA, because Jonas Korpisalo, since coming over there, has played 9 games. He's got a .919 save percentage. For the whole season, he's 13th in the NHL in goals saved above expected. Stuart Skinner is 38th. He is positive, though, in that he's stopped 2.1 goals above expected. Korpisalo has stopped 13. So I honestly don't know if goaltending is as big a concern for those two teams. I think Edmonton, obviously, they're going to need all 4 lines to score, and I think that they're very well equipped to do that. At least their top 3 lines, obviously, right now. Shout out to Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, by the way. I had no idea he was even close to a 100-point season, and then I saw on Twitter the other night, it's like Ryan Nugent-Hopkins has scored 100 points. And I'm like, okay, I guess that happened.
I saw that too. Kind of
yeah,
shocking.
I mean, good for him. Former first overall pick who has had a solid career, but had never eclipsed 70 before this season. Obviously, playing with McDavid and Draisaitl helps, but if you get 100 points, you've earned that. So
yeah, exactly.
Props to him. I think this Oilers team has really taken a step forward, obviously, since they brought in Matthias Ekholm. It's just completely, rounded out their defense and really provided that shutdown presence that they've been lacking, these last couple of seasons. Obviously, Darnell is good, but probably overpaid, more of an offensive guy first. I think swapping out the offensive minded Tyson Barrie for a better player and better fit in Matthias Ekholm has paid huge dividends for the Oilers, obviously. With LA, though, they were able to take Edmonton to 7 games last year. They only allowed 2 goals in that game 7. And remember, they did that all without Drew Doughty last year. He was not available for the Stanley Cup playoffs last year due to injury. So obviously, in any matchup, without your top defenseman, it's going to hurt you a lot. But maybe against the Oilers more than any other because of obviously how potent that McDavid and Draisaitl are. So to have Downey available, have him in the lineup for this year's playoffs, and with some of the young guys, of course, that got that learning experience last year, I think this is a Kings team that is fairly well equipped to potentially, make a dark horse run. And of course, not only those young guys growing since last year, they've also brought in Kevin Fiala, who has been fantastic for them. So I think that's going to be a really exciting series as well. And I think it's one that people are going to overlook a lot because obviously, like I said, we're going to have a Maple Leafs Lightning rematch. We're treading towards Devils Rangers in the first round. I think that Oilers Kings series is going to get overlooked, and I think it's going to be a fantastic round.
I agree. So moving on, I know you're a Phillies fan and a Philly boy.
Mm-hmm.
What are your first impressions on them this season?
Pain. Yeah, I mean, for the Phillies, I would not be as concerned if they were anywhere close to fully healthy right now. Like the 1-5 start stinks, but it's 6 games out of 162. The Phillies are going to go through probably another stretch this season where they lose 5 of 6. Most teams are going to go through a stretch, if not every team will go through a stretch this year where they lose 5 of 6. So it happens. Obviously, it's unfortunate for them at the start of the year, but with where the Phillies are injury-wise right now, they're without Rhys Hoskins. They just lost Derek Hall, so they literally don't have a first baseman right now. Obviously, Bryce Harper seems like he's trying to ramp up and be aggressive with his return, but he's still going to be out until at least Memorial Day, probably at least until mid-June or so, at the earliest. And obviously, the one thing you don't want to do with Harper is rush him back, and then he gets hurt, and you simply cannot afford to have that happen, both for this season and for the franchise going forward as well. But they're also without Ranger Suarez, their number 3 starter. Brandon Marsh was hurt. He's back in the lineup today, which is good, obviously. But yeah, the injuries right now have turned what looked like on paper was going to be a really formidable Phillies lineup into kind of a mediocre unit, if we're being honest, looking at it right now. Obviously, only 6 games in, of course, but that the Phillies need to do right now is kind of just tread water, and just kind of hope they can do what they did last year and come on in the second half. And I think what a lot of people overlook in how the Phillies were able to survive without Bryce Harper last year is the fact that the 3 weeks or so before Harper got hurt, they were playing really good baseball. That was right after they fired Joe Girardi and brought in Rob Thompson, and he instilled that kind of quiet confidence in the clubhouse and was able to relax the atmosphere and just ease everybody up. And I think it's a lot easier, obviously, to play better when you are playing better, even if you're dealt significant bad breaks with injuries. And that Phillies team, they lost Harper, they lost Gene Segura, they would lose Sir Anthony Dominguez and Zach Wheeler later on in the season, while Harper was still out as well. So it was certainly a team that went through adversity last year, and they're going through a lot of it now, of course. But going into that stretch last season on the back of 3 weeks of really good baseball, I think really helped propel them. And so I am a little concerned that this stretch of adversity is off to such a poor start because things are not going to get easier for them on the injury front for a little while.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, obviously the big hit is Bryce Harper just not being able to play for like a long time. And I mean, their bats have been so cold. I feel like they have one player, Bryson Scott, just kind of over the 400 mark. And
my guy.
Yeah. But hopefully Trey Turner can kind of carry them to the promised land. I mean, he can only do so much. He's one player. But I mean, the Phillies team has just they were ice cold against the Rangers in their first series. And I think they got outscored by, I think.
You have 27 runs in those first 2 games, which is bad.
Yeah.
It's bad.
Mm-hmm. 7-11 and then 3-16. So
hopefully some home cooking this weekend helps solve things.
Yeah.
I'd really like us to not be the first team in Major League history to boo our players at our ring ceremony. That would be bad.
Oh, that would be bad. Do you think they could beat the Reds today?
Yes. I mean, Hunter Green, it's unfortunate for the Phillies that the Reds game 2 days ago got rained out because now Hunter Green is starting this game as well. Mm-hmm. I mean, obviously, the Reds are the Reds. The Phillies should win this game. Zach Wheeler's pitching for the Phillies, and he's obviously usually fantastic. He wasn't in that game against Texas. So, yeah, the Phillies can definitely beat the Reds, but, I mean, obviously, Green makes it a little bit tougher.
Yeah. Any other teams that kind of early predictions for the World Series? I know there's a lot of baseball going on, but any teams that kind of stick out to you that are kind of true title contenders?
Yeah, I mean, not really much has changed, I'd say, just because we're so early into the season. Like, saying this out loud helps me feel a little bit better about the Phillies. my World Series prediction at the start of the season was San Diego over Seattle. And I think that's a very fair prediction. I think a lot of people think those two teams are going to do the World Series as well. Those teams have a combined record of 5-9 so far. So I think that just goes to show you how early it is, really. I just think it's too. You got to give everyone at least a month, I feel like, in baseball before you can really establish that sample size. So I'd say not much has changed, really, just based on my perceptions of everyone going into the year. So we'll see.
I agree. I mean, like you said, there's a lot of baseball. As a Minnesota kid, I'm not a big baseball guy, but I'm kind of a fair weather fan when it comes to the Twins. I was a huge fan in 2019, 2020 when they had all those home runs. And I was like, they started off 4-0, and I was like, is this our year again? And be excited. They lose 2 games. I'm like, kind of hopping off the bandwagon now. So, I mean, I don't know too lot about baseball, but Rays are 6-0 right now. They look very good. Yes. So I think they're obviously always year in, year out. They're always a team to watch.
Yeah, they always seem to find a way.
Yeah,
just one of those teams.
But Angels, I know I keep saying it's early, but Angels are 4-2. They've kind of been trending to look better and better. And I think, do you think it's this year that Mike Trout finally gets to the playoffs and Shohei can actually do something?
I mean, I hope so, for their sake and for Angels fans' sake. I know there was some optimism around the Angels organization and the fan base a little bit this offseason compared to some of the past years about some of the moves they made in the offseason. I personally didn't really share it just because I wasn't wowed by any of the moves they made in the offseason. And obviously it's just, you got, like, they're kind of like the Maple Leafs, obviously. Like, at some point, you just got to show it.
Yeah.
Obviously, the Angels last season, through a month and a half, 2 months, they looked very good, and they lost 14 straight or whatever it was, and that torpedoed their season. So, I mean, Shohei's great, Trout is great. I think they've got some pieces around those guys that are good, but it's kind of like they kind of remind me of like the 2021 Phillies, where you've got the A players and you've got some B players. But do you have enough like B-, C+ players? When injuries and cold streaks come around, that those guys can kind of fill the gaps, and that's where I'm less sold on the Angels. So we'll see how things play out for them. Obviously, those sources can come out of nowhere. For example, they traded for Logan O'Hoppe from the Phillies last year for Brandon Marsh, and he's hit some big home runs for them this year. So maybe he's the guy who steps into that type of role. So I think we're just going to have to wait and see, but I hope so for Angels fans' sake. And I'm someone who just likes baseball as a whole.
Any other baseball comments you want to make?
Not really. I think I might need more pitching in our fantasy league for Vendetta, because I think I just drafted like the minimum amount of pitchers to fill the spots. And yeah, I feel like in fantasy baseball, you need some pitchers on your bench, some starters as well, just to mix and match those guys in, because position players don't have as much value, because I mean, everyone's playing 6 days a week. So unless you're like diving into the matchups and the scouting reports and like treating it like you're an actual manager, which I do not have the time for.
I agree. But moving on to the NBA, I feel like I've kind of talked about this a lot in previous kind of episodes of The Daily Show, is how tight the Western Conference playoff race has been. Obviously, the play-in, we all know that. But the Lakers right now sit atop of the play-in seating at 7 with 41-39. Right behind them are the Pelicans, the Wolves, and the Thunder. And now the Mavericks, which is kind of shocking at the beginning of the year. Everyone thought Luka Doncic would be the MVP. When they got Kyrie, everyone flipped out. But right now, they sit at the 11th spot at 38-42 and are going to be essentially eliminated from the play-in if they don't do something now. So that was a big surprise for me. Any thoughts on the NBA play-in right now?
Yeah, I actually read an article in the New York Times the other day that was really good, talking about why things haven't worked for the Mavs, even though that Kyrie and Luka have both been putting up points, and individually, they've been fine, but it's just the effect that they've had on the team as a whole, and their spacing and whatnot, and their efficiency, and why things have gone so south for them. But yeah, I think that's just the biggest thing. Sorry, I'm getting bombarded with text right now.
You're good.
Yeah, I think that's just the biggest thing for them, is that those guys have not just meshed well enough together. But I'm excited for, just to see what happens, obviously. In Dallas, I mean, they could still make it in. They are, even with the Thunder in the loss column right now. So they've got a puncher's chance, obviously, of course. And they're one of those teams that they can just sneak in potentially, with the star power they have. I don't think they're a team that you want to face necessarily. So obviously they've really been struggling. They're only 3-7 in their last 10 games, but they've got star power, and star power usually is what is the name of the game in the NBA playoffs. So you never know.
Yeah. You never know around playoff time, especially with the additional play-in. I think it's so hard to really truly see who is actually a playoff team. I mean, we saw at the beginning of the year that the Pelicans were the 1 seed in the West with Zion, and now they dropped down to the A seed with just above 500. So they're definitely a team to watch for the playoffs, which personally I would love to see the Pelicans if Zion would come back for the playoffs. If they get out of the first round, then I think they would be a big threat to the Nuggets or whoever they face.
Yeah, and they can still finish as high as fifth technically because the West is still such a logjam.
That's true. But right now, I think that every team from 1 to 7 could be a true like title contender. I know JJ Redick said that on one of the podcasts a few days ago, but I'm kind of stealing this from him. And he made a very good point that the Nuggets, Grizzlies, Kings, Suns, Clippers, Warriors, and Lakers, they could all be title contenders. Honestly, I mean, with the NBA, like how it's going this year, especially the Lakers, obviously since trading Russ, they've been a lot better. They've got a more complete team. The Warriors have been dwindled with injuries, but their starting five has been very good. We know Stephen Curry, Clay, Draymond, all those guys can lead a team to the playoffs, and especially lead them to the finals. But the Clippers, if PG is healthy, Kawhi's been playing some great basketball. They're very well rounded, so they could do some damage. Suns, Kings, Grizzlies, Nuggets. We all know they can do something. So I think Western Conference is very tight, and whoever comes out of that, I think they could definitely win the championship, whoever it is. But moving on to the Eastern Conference in the NBA, the Bucks solidified themselves as the 1 seed, along with the Celtics, Sixers, Cavs, Knicks, Nets, and then the battle of the play-in. So, any predictions for your Western and Eastern Conference champions right now?
I mean, I hope it's the Sixers. Will it be? We'll see. Maybe potentially. I mean, potentially, but
yeah,
they're obviously Boston's. Boston's played them really tough all season. You know, they finally got a win against them the other night. But I mean, the Celtics didn't have Brown or Robert Williams, so and it took 52 Joel Embiid points just to squeak by.
Yep.
So yeah, I mean, I think that these top 3 teams in the East, it's probably gonna be one of those 3. I know it's that groundbreaking revelation. But I think all those the 4 through 7 teams, I don't know if those are necessarily title contenders, but they're spoiler teams certainly. I think they could definitely, give one of those top 3 teams a real scare. So we'll see how things play out. Obviously, I know we're still not decided on who's going to get 6 versus 7 between Brooklyn and Miami. So obviously, it would be kind of funny if the Heat wound up getting the 6th seed because obviously they were the team that eliminated the Sixers in the second round last year, and then Sixers took PJ Tucker from them. And so they could potentially meet in the first round. It would actually be the 3rd playoff series of the Embiid era against the Heat. Sixers won in the first round against them in 2018. So if they meet again, I hope that the first round result repeats itself and not the second round one.
Yeah. I mean, like you said, I think the Heat are, for the team who plays them in the first round, I think they could definitely be a spoiler. I'm a Celtics guy. Love the Celtics. I know you're a Philly fan, so I don't want any beef with them. I respect the Sixers, but I think the Heat honestly could play a very big spoiler, whoever they play. Celtics kind of had some trouble with them over this year, and especially last year with the conference finals, or 2 years ago, sorry. But I think the Bucks come out of the East, sadly, as I'm a Celtics fan. But I mean, they've just been so much better than any other team, and who's really going to stop Giannis in the playoffs? Yeah. So I got the Bucks out of the East, and the West is just a whole new beast. But do you have any other things you want to cover today, Andrew?
I think I'm good if you are.
I'm good. One final thing, it's coming from an IU fan, is Caleb Love has transferred to Michigan. I know Cervantes said it in the College Hoops chat, but Caleb Love has transferred to Michigan, sadly, as he was kind of speculated to go to Indiana. But that was news a little bit a while ago, but it just came out today, and he finally made his decision. So,
gotcha.
With that final comment, the this has been the Vendetta Sports Daily Show with Andrew. So, thank you.
Of course, thank you.